Run with endurance. Hebrews 12, 1-3. Greyhound dogs are relatively fast. You may not think so if you've ever ridden on a Greyhound bus that doesn't seem to make much speed from one small town to the next and then the next. But a Greyhound can go 39 miles per hour and a domestic rabbit only 35. And so the dogs love to go after those rabbits. And in Florida, there are tracks where the dogs compete with each other to see which one can get to the rabbit first. But those in charge of the event have figured out a strategy. They use mechanical rabbits. And they can control the speed so that no matter how fast the animal, he never gets his target. Well, the story goes that the race had begun, the shot had been fired, and everybody was watching and cheering, and the mechanical rabbit took off, and the greyhounds went after it. As it rounded the curve, the mechanical rabbit had a short circuit. It went up in a puff of smoke. The dogs didn't know what to do. Several just lay down where they were, panting and barking. Others, still consumed with the chase, kept running straight into the wall. Some went round and round, going after their own tails, while the rest just stood there and howled at the crowd. There is a race in life, and each one of us may choose what it is we're after, and how much we're willing to expend, what training we should give, and what practice and what determination to make sure that what we're going for is worth all that we put into it. And this world is filled with rabbits, mechanical rabbits, and people and forces and influences telling us, run after this, go for that. Here's the secret to the meaning of life and success and fulfillment. Oh, you don't have it yet? Run harder. Outdo the people beside you. Take the turn. Give it all you have and then some, and you'll finally get that rabbit. It just keeps going faster and faster and faster. If it's not the Lord Jesus Christ, it's going to blow up in a puff of smoke. Hebrews 12, verses 1-3. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. The New Testament is full of racing terminology and analogies. Perhaps you'd like to write down these scriptures. In Galatians 2 and verse 2, Paul, having converted to Christ and having begun to tell the good news to others, met with those who had been Christians before him to make sure that he was not running, that he had not run in vain. Galatians 2:2. Then in Galatians 5:7, he tells these believers who were going off the track, you were running well. Who hindered you? One version says, who cut in on you so that you did not finish? 1 Corinthians 9:24-27. Don't you know that all who run in the race run, but only one wins the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. In Corinth, located on an isthmus, a narrow piece of land connecting the mainland to the Peloponnesus, there were athletic games every 2 years that were the forerunners of what we know as the Olympics. And people would come from all over. In those days, Corinth was 20 times the size of Athens. And using that as a backdrop, that which the readers would have known so well, Paul wrote that in those races, they are out to get a perishable wreath, but we are going for something that will never fade away, never diminish, that will last forever and ever. And he says, therefore I run as not without aim. Therefore I box as not beating the air. Therefore I buffet, not buffet, but buffet. Therefore I whip my body into shape so that having preached to others, I should not be disqualified and miss the prize. Toward the end of his life, Paul wrote 2 Timothy 4, 7 and 8. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord will award to me, and not only to me, but to all those that have loved His appearing. The Christian life is a race. We have to know our destination. We have to know our pace setter. We have to know that which energizes us, that which could detract us or detour us off of that path. The Greek word rendered race is the word from which we get our term agony. Some of us remember watching on ABC The Wide World of Sports. Anybody recall that? Where it talked about the thrill of victory and what? The agony of defeat. And in 2 Timothy 4, if we were just to transliterate, I fought the good fight and so forth, it would be I've agonized a good agony. To agonize is to exert yourself in a contest, a conflict, a battle, a race, or a war. And of course, if someone is fighting against you, that's the person who antagonizes you in this great event. As we talk about racing and running, here we are in Montana. And so I must ask you if you know who was the first white man ever to see the geysers of Yellowstone. John Coulter. Good. In the early 1800s, the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1805, they came into Montana. And when the expedition was turning back, John Coulter was so enamored with what he had seen so far, he couldn't get enough of it. Yellowstone's like that, isn't it? And so, believe it or not, when they turned the opposite direction, he kept going. There were monster grizzlies, whitewater rapids, and dangerous Indians. But Coulter is best known for a single foot race. He ran as no one ever had before because he ran for his life. It was near Bozeman. He was surrounded by Blackfeet Indians with drawn bows. He was alone. They swarmed him. They stripped him of all his clothes, and they held a powwow as to what to do with him. They asked him, "Are you as fast as a deer?" He lied. "No, I'm as slow as a turtle." So they gave him a 300-yard head start. The plane stretched ahead for 6 miles. Coulter focused on a line of trees and began the run of his life. They'd taken all his clothes, his shoes. His bare feet were soon cut to ribbons by sharp stones and prickly pear. After 3 miles, only a handful of Indians were even close, but one was within 200 yards and was gaining on him. Coulter's body was so stressed that his face began to bleed. At 4 miles, there was an Indian wearing protective moccasins, as Coulter did not have, less than 50 yards away. And Coulter was in range of that enemy's sharp lance. So Coulter turned, raised his hand as if to surrender. The Indian threw the lance and missed and stumbled head over heels. Coulter finished the Indian off with the Indian's own weapon. He ran the remaining mile to the river. He swam out to a raft of driftwood. He hid under the raft in the icy waters. Other Indians arrived, but they could not find him. Under cover of darkness, Coulter swam downstream to a tiny stretch of bank concealed by trees and brush. He had no clothes. He was half frozen. He was nearly delirious from exposure and loss of blood. He pulled himself from the stream. He lay gasping on the bank. No rifle, no food, no fire, no horse, no shoes. He was stripped of everything except for his will to live. He was half dead. He was still 150 miles away from the trading post at Bighorn. And yet, 7 days later, he walked, wearing nothing, bleeding and hungry, into the Bighorn compound. What a contest. What a race. What a goal. What a danger. He could either run or die. It was the only thing in his life that mattered. It was urgent, it was pressing, it crowded out anything else he might have ever thought of. The writer of Hebrews challenges us, run with endurance the race that is set before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus and considering the hostility he faced from others so that we ourselves would not lose heart. We're going to talk about three main ideas from this powerful passage. The first has to do with the witnesses that surround us. We talked about many of these last evening, didn't we? By faith, Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and then time would fail the writer to tell about this one and that one and so many others. The cloud term that's used here is not of one small cloud against a blue backdrop, but an overcast view so that everywhere you look, you can't miss the cloud cover. And the Old Testament record is given to let us see that with the help of God, we can win this race. It's been suggested that we are in the arena, and those who have gone before are sitting in the stands, shouting, so to speak, "We have done it, you can too." Don't quit. Don't tire out. Don't be a spectator. Don't sit on the sidelines. Don't let the exhaustion and the slope and the other aspects threaten you or diminish your zeal as you run. You and I also have witnesses in our own lives as Christians. Perhaps you knew a faithful elder and his wife. Perhaps your parents or grandparents or older people in the Lord's body that you saw the way they lived and the way they died, and that gave you confidence to be with them one day on the other side of the finish line. There are many in my cloud of witnesses. I will tell you just about two, my father and my wife's father. My dad came out of a denominational background. He was from Middle Tennessee. He met my mom during World War II in Paris, Texas, which is, by the way, the second largest Paris in the world. It has its own smaller version of the Eiffel Tower. They married on a hot August night. My dad would tell the story that the preacher stood there and looked at them and said to my dad, "Wilt thou?" And Dad said, "We all wilted." My mom's influence, after a year, my dad was baptized into Jesus Christ and became an elder in the Lord's church and served and led in that way for 28 years and raised my older brothers and me to know that race. My father was a man that was steady and consistent. No one particular exciting, dramatic moment in his life. He was like Enoch. He walked with God all that time. I remember his last words to me. He had bone cancer. He also had a lung condition. The last night he talked with me. He said, "Cory, I'll see you in heaven if I don't see you here in the morning." Those are the last words he spoke. I have my dad's notepad. I have his prayer list. I have the blessings he wrote down and the things he was asking God to help him with. It was beside his favorite recliner. Tanya's daddy and mother moved to greater New York City when she was 7 years old. The church had an exhibit at the World's Fair, and they needed fine Christians to meet people that came to the Big Apple and talk to them about the Lord. There was a great exhibit area that had been set up, and my father-in-law and his wife were so connected with people and so interested in saving the lost that they asked Jack to move back to New York and preach for the church in Flushing, Queens. And so when Tanya was just a little girl, her family moved from where they had lived to New York. And my father-in-law stayed there reaching people for Christ through his first heart attack, his second heart attack, and the third one that finally ended his time on earth when he was only 61 years old. A service was held for him in the church building there in Manhattan, and 5 young men stood up to speak whose lives had been transformed by Jack's energy, and I was not one of them. There were 5 others. I would have been glad to do so. And after that service that day, a man came up to me. He said, "Cory, Jack was studying the gospel with me before he died. Could I be baptized today?" And he was. Jack's in my cloud of witnesses. My dad's in my cloud of witnesses. I could go on with others, and so could you, couldn't you? We are surrounded by them. So the more we remember the race they've run and their commitment and the faithfulness they exhibited, the more we realize that by the grace of God, the race can be won. And it is worth continuing and finishing and never pulling back. I want to say something else about this word witnesses used here in verse 1. It comes from a term from which we get the word martyr. And though you and I think, first of all, of a martyr as one like Stephen in Acts 6 and 7, who was put to death because of his belief, and it did come to mean that, originally a martyr was one who witnessed something and then talked about it. He gave his affirmation. He, in this case, confessed the Lord before men. He was bold and courageous regardless of the consequences. And so many that have gone before paid the ultimate price because of their faith. There's a second idea in this paragraph. We talked about the witnesses that surround us. Now we see the weights that can sink us. Lay aside every encumbrance, anything that might burden you, that might slow you, that could sink you. Cut it loose if it could possibly keep you from crossing that final line. And the sin which so easily besets us. On the one hand, there are things in our lives that are not in and of themselves evil, kept in proportion, in perspective. They're not things that we must avoid necessarily entirely. Certain things we have to do to just get through this life. But if we attach too much importance to them, if we have them way too heavy in our hearts and take our allegiance and divide our loyalty, that's what we must let loose of. There's a travel agent I know that gave me good advice about going from place to place. He said, "Cory, put your suitcase on the bed and only pack the things that you absolutely know you must have on the trip. And once you've done that, put half of that stuff back in the closet." If you and I were climbing one of these mountains, what would we take with us? Only that which was essential to get us to the top. Why is it that NASCAR autos don't have back seats and spare tires? And I'm told seat belts. That might be a good idea. And why is it that in the Olympics, especially in ancient times, people didn't wear very much? Because it was all about speed and getting to their destination. I'd like to ask you, as I ask myself, is there something in your life? It's not a bad thing, but it's become such a priority, it looms so large in your vision that it could be a deterrent to you. And as you think about that, consider the other idea of a besetting sin that might be a part of your experience. In one way, all sin is the same. It's disobedience to God. It's a desire to do things our way and not His. Yet it may be that the sin that troubles you the most is not exactly the same as that which troubles me the most. I would be very foolish if I do not admit to myself and to God, and perhaps to trusted Christian friends, this is an area in which I might be set back. I might be derailed. I might be taken off the track. Pray for me. Help me. Counsel me. The Scripture says in 1 Corinthians 10, 12 to 14, let him that thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. I know of a man who wrote a book that was widely purchased and read about ordering your private world. He advised so many others of how to make sure that things were right. This man was also a counselor, and he engaged with sin with a person that he met through his counseling experience. And after writing the book, Ordering Your Private World, he wrote a second book, Rebuilding Your Shattered World. And he said, this is what happened to me. I thought I was safe in that particular area. And I wasn't. And so you and I must be on guard. Whether it's lust, whether it's greed, whether it's envy, whether it's pride, whatever it may be, the weights that can sink us, that can stop us, that can subdue us, must be cut loose. Do you ever read about these dumb criminal stories? And you wonder if they could possibly be true? There was one sometime back about a fellow named David Postman. I don't know if it's accurate or not, but I'm going to tell it. 33 years old, arrested in Providence, Rhode Island. Allegedly, he knocked out an armored car driver and stole the closest 4 bags of money he could put his hands on. It turned out they contained $800 in pennies. Each bag weighed 30 pounds. And as he slowed to a stagger, making his getaway, the police officers easily jumped him from behind. I don't know if that really happened, but I think it's a picture of what can happen. Jesus said in those strong words in Mark 9, around verse 45 and following, if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. The same with your foot, or gouging out the eye. Such a blunt, graphic way of saying, don't let any sin interfere with your goal as you run this race. In Matthew 13, he described the sower. Remember going out to scatter the seed? And some of it fell on the pavement. The birds came and ate it up. It never went deeper. Some fell on thin soil, rocks underneath, and it started out fast, but the hot sun, it withered away. And Jesus said the cares of the world, the deceitfulness of riches. And then he talked about the ground that had the thorns, the weeds in it that choked it out. And he said the persecution that can come, the consequences of following him. And that's why he urged us to count the cost before entering the race and making the decision to begin. So if the witnesses who surround us help us to see the race can be won, the weights that subdue us remind us that the race can be lost. Rosie Ruiz, you ever heard that name? Was famous some years for running and winning the Boston Marathon, many years before the explosion in that tragedy. And when she claimed her prize, people noticed, even though she was the first one to cross, that she wasn't perspiring. She didn't seem tired or out of breath. They checked the cameras and they found out that Mrs. Ruiz had hopped the subway. She went down the stairs, got on the train, down to the next stop, maybe changed trains, I don't know, and off she went, and she emerged running fast and strong right toward the end of the race. She lost the prize. Poor thing. Too bad. You know, also a long time ago in the New York Times, this is true, there were advertisements that appeared for a firm called Rent a Jogger Incorporated. The ad appealed, enjoy the healthful benefits of daily jogging for 1 whole year from the comfort of your own easy chair. For $1.95, subscribers to the service could stay in their beds in the early morning hours while someone in the company would run in their names. The ad even promised a certificate that could be framed and placed over the bed. Who can run your race? Not your elders, not your preacher, not your parents, not your brother or your sister. This is your race. And the weight that can interfere with your progress, you must name it and address it and turn from it and let it go. And don't let it be that ball and chain that will prevent you from crossing the line. Then the other idea that jumps out at us is that the key to this whole thing is our focus. Fixing your eyes on Jesus. He's the author, that is, He's the one who's with us at the start. He's the beginner, the pioneer. And He's the perfecter, the finisher. He's the one that will see us through all the way. So I'm going to call this third idea the winner who sustains us. It's interesting to me in the New Testament that on the one hand, the grace of God is all about the fact that Jesus ran the race for me. He was my substitute. He paid the debt. He won the prize. The Bible makes this as clear as it can. But if I ever take that to mean that therefore I sit back complacently and quietly and idly, I've missed the other part of the Bible's teaching about the race. It does not say, Jesus won the race, therefore you need not be concerned about it. Rather, Jesus won the race, therefore you run that race behind Him with all of your might. Notice how He says that He endured the cross. He despised the shame. Despised meaning He discounted. He minimized. He did not let the shame become so large that it obscured His view. The joy was before Him. You see, Jesus was so intent on the prize that whatever it took to get there was worthwhile. The joy of saving you and me. The joy of saying it is finished. The joy of sitting down at the right hand of the Father on high. And it was the way He estimated the joy compared to the shame and the pain that determined the outcome of the race. We've noted before that the early readers of this letter, chapter 10, 32 to 39, some had lost their property. Some were being harassed. Some were being thrown in jail. They were facing all kinds of opposition in this race. The writer of Hebrews says, you've not even shed blood yet in your striving against sin. Verse 4. Consider Him who endured such hostility from sinners against Himself, so that you yourselves will not lose heart. Have you ever heard the name Florence Chadwick? She was an outstanding swimmer. The first woman to cross the English Channel swimming in both directions. In 1952, on the 4th of July, her goal was to become the first woman to swim from Catalina Island to the California coast, 22 miles. She started. The sea was like an ice bath. The fog was so dense she could hardly see the support boats. Sharks cruised toward her lone figure, only to be driven away by rifle shots. Against the frigid grip of the sea, she struggled on, hour after hour after hour, and millions watched on national television. In one of the boats near her, her mother was there, urging her on, and her trainer as well offered encouragement. It's not much farther. They urged her not to quit, and she never had until then. At a certain point, not having reached the goal, she insisted on being pulled out. Do you know how much she lacked when she gave up? Only half a mile of the 22 miles. Do you know why she quit? It wasn't the sharks. It wasn't the temperature of the water. It wasn't that she was so exhausted she couldn't go on. And it wasn't that she lacked encouragement. Do you know what it was? It was the fog. It was the fog. She could no longer see the land. Fixing your eyes on Jesus. What's in the fog in your life? Could be in a number of things. But if you and I let the fog obscure our view of Him, we may have the same outcome as Florence Chadwick. 2 months later, she tried again. This time, she was prepared for the dense fog. She swam with her faith intact, her goal clearly pictured in her mind. She knew that regardless of what was in front of her, the land was on the other side, and she made it. She became the first woman to swim the Catalina Channel. And men, she eclipsed the men's record by 2 hours. Isn't that great? She was determined. Nothing would stand in her way. The witnesses that surround us remind us the race can be won. The weights that can subdue us remind us the race can be lost. And the winner who sustains us makes it clear that keeping our eyes on Him as our Savior, our standard, and our source, that's the key to running, to persevering, and to winning. Tonight, what a challenge this passage has brought to all of us. To help us see where we are in the race, if we have begun by becoming Christians, if we're still going as strong and hard as we were when we started, or if we've let other things discourage us and slow us down and make us less effective. And it's called us once again, wherever we are, to get on that track, follow Him all the way home. And one last thought. Go back to verse 1. Do you see where it says, therefore let us run? I love the word us because it means I'm not running alone. This is what the church, God's people, the fellowship here at camp, this is what it's all about, is helping each other win that race. In 1992 in the Barcelona Olympics, Derek Redmond was about to accomplish his lifelong goal of winning the gold in the 400-meter race. He started fast, but then he pulled a muscle and fell down on the pavement. The other runners went on. Suddenly there was a man up in the stands who started pushing people aside and making his way down to the ground, and the guards tried to stop him, but they couldn't. It was Derek Redmond's father, Jim. He came over to his son. He said, you don't have to finish this race. And Derek Redmond said, yes, I do. And his father said, then I'm going to finish it with you. With his arm around his son, step by step, little by little, they went and they crossed the finish line together. Brothers and sisters, that's what it's about. I don't know who knows who won the gold in that particular race. But I'll tell you who won. It was Derek Redmond. And he won with the help of his father. If we can help you in any way in your race, we hope that you'll avail yourself of the opportunity to study and pray and talk with any of us here in this greatest run of your life. Let's stand and sing.